The Golf GTI, arguably one of the most influential and iconic cars to ever hit the SA car scene. In this video, I'm gonna show you everything you need to know before buying a Golf GTI. I'm gonna show you what goes wrong with them. I'm gonna show you websites and resources to use when something goes wrong. I'm gonna show you websites and resources to use before buying one. And then we're gonna shop around and try to find some examples of each variant. So then let's get started with a brief history of this absolute icon. So the story of the Golf GTI in South Africa starts in 1976 with the 1.6 liter 800 kilogram go-kart that was the Mark 1. This car would later go on to be the father of the City Golf, which is a variant of the Golf that VW South Africa started to produce after they saw the popularity of the Mark 1 version. So then a real icon that set the standard for what Golfs were later to become, which is a fun, powerful hot hatch that you can also fit the entire family into and take on a long family trip. A few years later, we got the bigger, better version of the Mark 1, which was the Mark 2, featuring a 1.8 liter 4-banger that would turn into a 2 liter in 1992 that was capable of hitting 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 9 seconds. At the time, these were crazy numbers, not so much today, but once again, just setting the standards for what a hot hatch was supposed to be at that time. After the Mark 2, we had the Mark 3 GTI, which is not really talked about a lot because it was overshadowed by the daddy of all Golfs, the Mark 3 VR6. But then this is where we start seeing Golfs becoming better cars and not just tin can like that trap. This is where we started seeing the introduction of stuff like airbags and ABS. Kind of crazy to think that back in the day, all you had was your hands, your feet, and God to protect you from overcooking a corner and losing your life. But yeah, that is unfortunately the reality of these older cars. After the Mark 3 in 1998, we received the Mark 4. This is where we started seeing GTIs becoming more big bodies, luxurious cars featuring stuff like leather seats, bigger cabin space, a wider stance and stuff like that. Although the Mark 4 was a bit of a transitional stage in the GTI lineup in that it was a transition away from the older Mark 3s and Mark 2s that were more just raw driving oriented cars to a more luxurious all-rounder that we saw later in models like the Mark 5, 6 and so on. But yeah, this is where we start seeing the Golf turning into what we're more familiar with today. Obviously, after the Mark 4, we had the Mark 5, which was, I would say, the first proper modern GTI. This is the car that a lot of GTIs take from or hawk back to, in that it was the first GTI to be just a kind of jack of all trades and master of all, honestly. This is also where we started to see the iconic DSG gearbox in the GTIs, enabling these Mark 5s to be able to hit 100 kilometers an hour in under 6.9 seconds. The Mark 5 started its life in 2005 with the AXX code engines, but then later switched to the far superior BWA engine that it would rock from 2006 all the way to the end of its production line in 2009. The Mark 5 was also where we started to see, just like iconic modern GTI styling cues like the red line across the grille and the big polished Denver rims that the Mark 6 would also receive. Speaking of the Mark 6, it was introduced in 2009 with similar performance to the Mark 5, just more modernized styling with those dot-like DRLs, more modernized face and slightly more modern interior. Again, not really a car that's much talked about just because it was the precursor to the big daddy of them all, the Mark 7. We got this absolute beast in 2013, sporting a faster DSG gearbox coupled with that iconic exhaust note. Apart from the E30 BMW, I struggle to find more iconic cars or more notorious cars in the South African culture. Later down its life, the Mark 7 would receive a facelift in the form of the 7.5 that features stuff like digital infotainment and revised looks. A few years after the 7.5, we got the Mark 8, which is the latest and greatest of the GTIs. Well, greatest is a bit subjective, but it definitely is the latest model. These things are basically just more modernized Mark 7s, totally redesigned front and back look. Given the interior looks totally different to the Mark 7s. It does always come down to preference in terms of which design you favor between the 7 and the 8. But yeah, that was the history of the Mark 8 in South Africa. Now, just a disclaimer for this video, I will be focusing on the Mark 4 and up. However legendary and iconic the Mark 1, 2, 3 is, I just don't think they're feasible for daily drivers. They're just really old cars. And since we're going to be focusing on common problems with these cars, it is a bit silly to consider consider the Mark 1 and 3 because they don't have common problems. They are the common problems. So yeah, we're going to be focusing on cars from the Mark 4 and upwards. Also something to keep in mind, I will leave the source for the history of the GTI, what I based the brief history of the GTI on. I'll leave that in the description below, so if you want to read up on that, then you'll find it in the description. Right, now let's move on to values for these cars. I used a bunch of websites, of car buying websites, to try and find examples, and the GTI market does seem kind of hot right now. Cars seem to have higher values than what I'm familiar with, but yeah, I guess that's just the nature of the market right now. But then starting off with the Mark 4, I was not able to find many examples of this car on any car buying website. Seems they're really rare to find on the market. I found some examples going for like 110,000 rand with really high kilometers, like over 200,000, but that could be down to just dealer markup, because 100,000 rand for a car that old and with that many kilometers does sound a bit crazy to me. But you should be able to find these cars, I should say, maybe on the open market like Facebook and stuff like that, maybe for 60,000-80,000 rands. But yeah, the ones that I found at like dealers on Auto Trader, cars.co.za, were like 100 and 110,000 rand. With the Mark 5, there is a considerable amount of examples on the market right now. Really decent examples can go for as much as 160,000 rand, while higher mileage cars go for around 100, some even going for less than 100, like 90 something thousand. So about 90 to 160,000 should be the range for Mark 5s. With Mark 6 GTIs being a lot more modern than the Mark 5s, I do see a considerable uptick in the price. Cars with around 200,000 kilometers were close to around 200,000 rand, some less, some more. Then cars with lower miles were more than 200,000, around the 220-240 range. With Mark 7s, cars in the range of around 180,000 kilometers were in the range of like 230k. Those were higher mileage cars, 180,000 kilometers, 200,000, 200 and something thousand kilometers. Those were around 230,000 rands. But then also you could find Mark 7 GTIs for like 170,000 rands, whereas the car has 100,000 kilometers. Those cars are most likely clocked, so I didn't take them into consideration. But cars that look decent, that look like the mileage matches the age of the car and the price also reflects that, they were around 230k. Now for fresher examples, maybe cars sub 100,000 kilometers, you can expect them to be closer to 300k, maybe 280, around about there. The 7.5 being considerably newer and packing more features than the 7 goes for much more of a premium. I was able to find low mileage examples of these cars going for like 375, 400,000 rands. Now for the Mark 8, I was able to find cars with kilometers ranging from 15,000 to 50,000 kilometers going for around 700,000 rand. But here I would just prefer buying a brand new car, which from VW will cost you anywhere between 800 and 900,000 rand. So yeah, those were the values that I was able to find. That doesn't mean that you should just take my word as fact. Go out there, do your own research. Maybe you'll find cars cheaper that are in better condition and stuff like that, but those are the ranges roundabout that you should expect for Golf GTIs. Right, now let's go over the common issues and risk that you could run into with buying Mark 4 to Mark 8 GTIs. Starting with the Mark 4, according to ECStuning.com, some of the issues that you could find with these cars are generally just age-related issues. These are getting on with age, with all of them being over 20 years old, so these are kind of maintenance items that you would expect to find in a car this old. The first item is window regulators. Next up, we have the engine temperature control sensor, which could lead to the car misfiring or your temperature gauge not giving you a reading. Next is suspension bushings, which could lead to noisy suspension. These include stuff like strut tower mounts, shock tower mounts, front control arms, sway bar bushings and end links, and the shocks. More than a lot of just wear and tear items in the suspension to look out for. Other well-known issues are a timing belt change after every 120,000 kilometers. Timing chains are a theme with GTIs, as you will see with the later cars, so this is something that you would want to address if you buy a car that hasn't had it fixed already, because losing timing in your car and having a valve hit a piston is not a good time at all. So make these a priority and just take care of them if they already haven't been taken care of. The central locking can also fail. They are just old cars. Little electronic gremlins like this do happen. The headlights can condensate and the aircon fan motor can also go out. Once again, just a lot of age related issues with this car, but the 1.8 liter engine that comes in these cars are generally really good engines. Just a lot of peripheral little stuff that goes wrong and that needs you to pay extra attention to. Once again, all this information about the Mark IV was sourced from ECS Tuning. I'll leave them linked down in the description below if you want to read up on the specifics of each and every issue mentioned in this video and some other minor issues that I left out. Right, then moving on to common issues with the Mark V GTI. I was able to source kind of an encyclopedia on Mark V GTIs on vwclub.co.za. So once again, I'll leave their link down below so that you can read up on literally anything and everything you want to know about these cars. But some common issues and failure points to look out for are stuff like the camshaft follower, which can lead to excessive strain on the camshaft lobe and also damage the high pressure fuel pump. The PCV valve can also fail and cause a loss of boost and just general misfires. The turbo recirculation valve can fail, causing a general lack of power and sluggish turbo response. The aircon compressor can also fail and be kind of expensive to fix. And because these cars have earlier examples of the DSG gearbox, parts inside of them can fail, or just the entire gearbox can fail, costing not of 34,000 rands to fix. So DSG gearboxes are just generally what you want to avoid with the Mark Vs. Get a manual to avoid being in debt for a considerably long amount of time in your life. And because these are performance cars, they have a high pressure fuel pump which can fail because of how hard it works and how hard GTIs are normally pushed. This can cause power cuts at wide open throttle and even extreme limp mode if the fuel pump is really damaged. All GTIs and just GTIs in general are really heavy on oil, so it is recommended that you fill it up with about 500 milliliters of oil every 1,000 kilometers, which seems kind of crazy, but that's the reality of just owning a GTI, is going through a lot of oil. It's also recommended that you replace your coil pack with Audi R8 coil packs since they are stronger and just generally better than the OEM Mark V ones. Carbon deposits can also form around the valves, which is something that you might want to get looked at and get cleaned because this can lead to a loss of performance in your engine. And then once again, all the locks on the doors can be common failure points because of, well, age. If you want more of the specifics of the maintenance cost, service intervals, and anything else about these cars, once again, I've left the link to vwclub.co.za in the description. So click that and go through it if you're seriously considering getting a Mark V. Could be a really helpful resource to help you avoid getting yourself into a big problem. So then moving on to the Mark VI, there were a lot of shared issues with the Mark V. These were high oil usage, the turbo recirculation valve, the PCV valve, the camshaft follow-up, carbon deposits around the valves, the coil packs, the high pressure fuel pump, and the DSG gearbox. Now, in addition to those problems, we also have some Mark VI specific problems. The timing chain tensioner can fail, obviously leading to the engine losing timing and potentially just canning it. Once again, valves kissing pistons is not really what you want in your engine. Now, because of the damaged tensioner, the timing chain can actually end up stretching for cars that have over 200,000 kilos on them, which once again would need it to be replaced because then you start having timing issues. And because of the timing chain damage, your entire camshaft unit can actually get damaged, which tend to be very expensive fixes to make. So it is very important when you get a Mark VI, make sure that the tensioner is fixed, or fix it if it hasn't as soon as possible, to avoid just the mudslide that is timing issues that stem from just that one component. Mark VI GTIs also have plastic intake manifolds which can fail and are kind of costly to repair. Also, the water pumps also have a tendency of failing. They're not a really common issue, but it can happen. The evap purge or N80 valve can also fail, leading to an irregular amount of fuel vapors within your fuel tank. Once again, for more specific issues and the price to fix each and every issue that I've listed, and even more issues that these cars tend to have, the link to vwclub.co.za is left in the description below. Moving on to the Big Daddy Mark 7, it also shares some issues with the Mark 6, like the Mark 6 shared with the Mark 5. These include the water pump or thermostat leaking, the timing chain wear that happened with the Mark 6, the carbon buildup, and the high pressure fuel pump failing. In addition to this, there are obviously some Mark 7 specific issues. These include stuff like the cylinder head valve springs failing over time, which could cause a misfire and is caused by them either breaking or just losing tension over time. If you disconnect the battery in your GTI or the regulators aren't working, you can also overwritten issue where the one-touch functionality on the window switches isn't working. Not really a huge problem, but mighty inconvenience, I must say. And the front shock mounts can fail, leading to excessive squeaking when you're turning in your suspension. On top of all these issues, an additional issue with the Mark 7 is just how much of a crime risk it is. These cars are really targeted. They are amongst the most targeted cars in South Africa. So buying one, you might want to look into some extra security to kind of secure your car, and also take insurance into consideration before buying one. Maybe get a quote or something just to make sure that you can afford it, because they do tend to have higher premiums because of how much of a crime risk they are. Once again, all of the details are linked in the description below. So visit vwclub.co.za if you want to read up more on the details of a Mark 7 GTI. It might sound like I'm sponsored by VW Club, but no, I just found them as a really useful resource when you're looking into buying GTIs, in terms of finding all of the issues with them, how much they cost to fix and stuff like that. So they are something you should be keeping in the back of your mind whenever you want to buy one. Visit the forum post on that specific car that you want to buy, read through it, and make sure that you are ready to face some of the issues that you might end up facing with your car. With the Mark 7.5 and the Mark 8, they are relatively new cars. Of course, they're gonna have little issues here and there, but with the Mark 8 especially, here you just want to buy really low mileage cars that are still under warranty, still under a service plan, and you won't have problems for a long time. So there aren't really issues to list with these cars, except for the obvious crime, but that's just a general GTI thing. So yes, that was everything you needed to know about the Golf GTI. Obviously, if you need more details, like I said, I left all of the information I used for this video in the description down below, so feel free to take some time and read through that. If you feel like I wasn't really detailed enough, this was a more of a broader overarching video than a specific video into each and every car. So yeah, I do recommend doing that, just clicking the links down in the description for more information. But apart from that, thank you guys so much for watching, and until the next one, goodbye.